under control. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, for now I'm here, but if things get out of control, I have two small kids. I may have to move to the suburbs, but that crime is going to spill over there too. It's already starting to do that.
Yeah, this is a thing that I've been thinking about a lot just as a younger person. Like, it seems like conditions are just going to keep getting worse in all the Western countries. And I don't know what you would recommend to someone this age if the thing is to escape, find a better place, or to just stay
No,
and fight, you know?
yeah, I think this, the latter part. Basically, things are so intertwined these days that unless you're willing to live like a monk in the middle of nowhere, which is not for I'm not saying you won't like it. It's just a very radical departure from what your life has been so far. And if it's going to be on your own, then my advice is definitely not to do that. I mean, if there's going to be a larger group, like maybe I don't know, 10, 10, 15 people, at the minimum of 10, then it's probably worth considering. But I think it's better to stay and fight. Basically, the way things have been set up right now is that there's no safe place, no matter where you go, unless it's in the wilderness. If it's going to be somewhat civilized, it's going to depend somehow on the financial system. And until the financial system gets radically modified or collapses, and then we have to start building from scratch, whatever it is, the current financial system will catch you no matter where you are, as long as you are in some kind of a civilized place. So I think it's better to just stay and either ride it out or fight, because at least around you where you are, you have a lot of like-minded people. So push comes to shove, at least you'll have people that are be willing to help you out and defend you, and you helping out and defending them. Then be in the middle of nowhere, and then the world around you is burning. And if that happens, then what do you do? Okay, so I don't know. I think it's better to try and stay and try to contribute for either changing this for the better, or if it collapses, starting to rebuild anew. I don't see another option.
Yeah, I saw you had a really good thread talking about the similar idea. I think it was on the Ray Peat forum, and a lot of people seem to be thinking about this idea, just particularly in the sense of everyone has these online communities now, and it's a thing where people have solidarity, especially in the Peat community, but don't really have anyone in real life besides that, and I think that's just a tragedy, but. I do think that the better a person their health gets, they can actually sort
Oh
of
yeah,
build these communities, and I have
yeah.
found that myself. So yeah,
Yeah, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. If you're among healthy people, it'll be easier for you to solve any problem that comes along your way. It'll be easier to basically recover if, God forbid, illness or like some kind of like a collapse happens, right? And if people are in poor health, then running away is not going to help, right? So if you're going to be running away with people, make sure that they themselves are in decent health at least, because if that's not the case, that thing is going to collapse. There'll be a hate to say it, but there'll be a drain on the community. Won't be able to contribute, and just being around sick and generally, I don't know, depressed people is just not. It's not very good for your own health, and it's just going to sabotage indirectly a lot of ideas and plans that you may have.
right, yeah. So I probably most of the people who know me or know like the underground facility already know about like the bioenergetic framework or raised ideas. But if you could explain it just simply to a layman or just anyone who doesn't really have a familiarity, how do you explain like bioenergetics?
Well, I guess in one word is that energy is everything, which a lot of basically any physicist you ask will probably agree with that. But energy is everything in biology too. And energy and structure are interdependent, even though modern medicine tries to separate them. Basically, if you go to a doctor and you have some kind of a problem, they're going to do everything possible to discover a structural problem. And if they can't, they'll say, "Well, you have a functional problem, and we don't know what to do with you." They may send you to a functional medicine doctor. But the end of the day, if they don't find a structural problem, they will say everything's fine with you, and whatever other symptoms are either psychosomatic or functional, and they can deal with them. But the bioenergetic view says that these things cannot be separated. If you have a structural problem, every doctor will agree that you will probably have a functional problem as well. In other words, if your leg is broken, clearly, your mobility will be impaired. That's the functional side. However, the bioenergetic view says it works the other way too. If you have a functional problem, which means not producing sufficient amount of energy through the oxidative metabolism pathway, then eventually this function that you have that's functional, it's going to manifest in structural problems, including diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, which do have structural components. Heart disease has these like plaques that are in your arteries. Cancer always has an entirely separate tumor that's grown and using your own tissue. So these are structural problems, but bioenergetic says structural problems can cause functional problems. Functional problems can cause structural problems, and ultimately, all comes down to the flow of energy. How intense is the flow of electrons from the food that we eat to the final electron acceptor, which is oxygen? And the analogy that Ray gave, and I think it's pretty good analogy, is that our body, basically everything that we are, including our consciousness, is like a light bulb between the two poles of a battery. And if it's not touching both poles properly, you're going to have this like flickering light. It's not going to be very strong. It periodically will go on and off, right? I think most people have seen that in the school experiment. But if it's well attached to the poles and there's a sufficient amount of energy in the battery, then you get this intense light, and it's not flickering, and it's just properly converting the electrons that are flowing through it into heat and light, which is what the light bulb does. We're the same way. The more effectively we convert the electrons from food, which is one pole of the battery, the negative one, into into basically passing them through our bodies and meeting them with oxygen, which is the positive pole of the battery, right? The more intense this process happens, the more energy we can extract from food, and the more vital and functional and healthy and even long living we are. Um, and this, by the way, this idea of the bioenergetic of biological energy being at the core of everything, it's not an alternative medicine theory. In fact, it has been part of allopathic, which means official, part of allopathic medicine for a very long time, at least 100 years. It just has always been kind of on the back burner because for a variety of political reasons, one of which is, okay, if you're telling me that anything that interferes with my production of energy is eventually going to make me sick, well, then if you look around yourself, you're going to find a million things every day in your everyday environment that are directly making you sick. Stress interferes with the production of energy from food. Poor diet. If you're eating these things that the official public health authorities are asking you to eat, many, if not most, of these things are directly inhibitory to the bioenergetic process. Some of them, actually, many of them contain the toxins that are directly interfering with your production of energy. If you're eating commercial food, there are things there. There are things like silicon dioxide, talc, titanium dioxide, artificial colors, sweeteners, and flavors. Every single one of these things, actually, many of these things are even carcinogenic, yet they continue to be in the food supply. The way we work, well, I'm sitting here in an office, and the light above me is very heavy in the blue spectrum. The blue spectrum is toxic to our mitochondria, where most of this bioenergetic process occurs. So this light is itself basically inhibiting my energy production right now. There's a carpet underneath the chair on which I'm sitting, and both the chair and the carpet are covered in these flame retardants, which are known carcinogens. So I'm also staring at a computer screen, and the computer screen is also heavy in the blue light spectrum. I'm touching a plastic keyboard, and the plastic leaches these chemicals that are known endocrine disruptors: BPA, BPS, a lot of others that are known to act as a feminizing agents for males, masculinizing agents for women. They can cause infertility, even sterility. They can cause cancer. So it's very inconvenient politically to allow a theory that says that everything around you affects you potentially positively or negatively, to allow this theory to dominate, because then we'll suddenly realize that we've been not only stressing ourselves to death, but what we get in return is actually really not very healthy for us. Everybody says, well, yes, we're working very hard, but we're also making a lot of money. The question is, what can you buy with this money? And if the things that are around you that you consider luxurious but are actually very toxic for you, then it was all futile, right? You basically worked for nothing. In fact, worse, because you just ruin your health. So this is a very conveniently political theory. And the one that's conveniently political is the genetic one, which says, no, you inherit certain genes, and basically your fate is more or less set in stone. They do allow for certain sort of, they call them epigenetic variations, and maybe susceptibility to disease, but ultimately how long you're going to live and what nasty disease you're going to acquire throughout your lifespan is mostly encoded in your genes. And of course, the establishment loves this theory because it says that, if something happens to you, disease or whatnot, bad luck. They just inherited the bad genes. There's nothing we can do. It's not due to us. It's not due to us poisoning you or stressing you out and whatnot. And another analogy that I like to give with biogenetics is the car analogy. So according to the mainstream theory, which I just mentioned, the genetic one, basically you have a car and the body is akin to the car. So the mainstream theory says, you drive your car, and you can put any different types of gas into the tank. What kind of gas you put into the tank has no effect whatsoever on whether you're going to get a flat tire, your windshield will break, the brakes will probably stop working, the transmission will break. So gas, which is the functional part, and the structure of the car are completely separate. And most mechanics will agree with that. I mean, they may say, okay, so if you put the wrong kind of gas in the car, you may have some problems with the engine, but it's not going to physically break it down, right? It's not going to disintegrate. It's going to be just going to have like maybe a run more slowly or require maintenance more often. The bioenergetics side view says that analogy is not true. Actually, if you use the car analogy, what kind of gas you put into the tank and how well you combust it to produce the energy that is coming from the gas determines everything about this car, not just how fast it will run, but also whether you will break down and how often you will break down and whatnot. Why? Well, because unlike the car, which is composed of atoms, the body is also composed of atoms, but they're also arranged in these organelles called cells. Okay, and the cells are living creatures, and the cells need energy not just to continue existing, but also to repair themselves. So the cells have these intricate mechanisms for self-repair. And basically, if you're not providing with sufficient amount of energy, using the analogy of the car, if the entire car is made out of cells, at some point, if they don't get a sufficient amount of energy, you most certainly will get a flat tire, whatever the equivalent is in the body. You will get a broken windshield. You will get like a damaged transmission. And eventually, with sufficient amount of damage because of lack of energy, the car will ultimately physically break down and will die, which is the analogy of the human body. That's the bioenergetic view, that basically the availability of energy fully determines how well the structure of that organism will be maintained, whether you call it a car or a body. The official version is that, oh no, you have a car, and basically that car, if it breaks down, it's all wear and tear. It has nothing to do with the gas that you pour in there and how well this gas is combusted. The bioenergetic says no. Gas, meaning energy, has everything to do with both how well you function and how well you maintain yourselves, because the body, using the analogy of the car, does have this innate ability to repair itself. And it's very rare that it needs an outside intervention. Only cases of where there's basically massive external trauma that the cells have trouble fixing themselves. They will probably still be able to fix it, but may heal in an inappropriate way. Let's say if you get a broken bone, I think it's the doctor can be very helpful because they can set the bone properly and it will heal properly. If you don't go to the doctor with a broken bone, eventually the bone will probably still heal, but it may heal in a crooked way, right? It may damage some tissue around the broken part. So that's the part where basically you may want to see a doctor. But for everything else, especially how long you live and how quickly you age, the production of energy is absolutely vital, and it determines everything, pretty much everything, in regards to both your health and who you are as a person. That's another aspect of bioenergetic theory, which says, your mood, fully determined by how much energy your brain is able to access from the food. So depression, anxiety, psychotic states, dementia, all of these things that are medicine says are strictly localized to the brain, have nothing to do with energy. Bioenergetic says no, they have everything to do with energy, because your brain consumes about 30% of your daily calories that you ingest. So if there's even a small deterioration or drop down in the amount of energy that the brain gets, you get basically immediately sour mood. And if this is extreme enough, and it's seen in people who drink a lot of alcohol, if they get a severe alcoholic hypoglycemia, which means drop of the blood sugar, they actually can get temporarily completely crazy and violent and even homicidal. In fact, in some countries, there's now a proposal that if you got caught doing something while in a state of severe hypoglycemia, you're declared temporarily insane, and you cannot stand trial in court. You're considered basically, not responsible for your actions. So bioenergetics theory says everything is about energy. Modern medicine says everything is about structure. And bioenergetics says, yes, everything may be about structure, but the energy controls the structure and builds more structure. And then this better built structure allows for more energy to flow. So it's kind of like a more holistic view, while the allopathic medicine takes only one side of the view and says, no, all we see is this mechanical object, and unless there's anything mechanically wrong with it, we're going to, basically declare that nothing's wrong with it. As when you go with a car to the mechanic, the car is not going to worry about what kind of gas you put in there. The mechanic is going to look at the car and say, hey, we need to change the tire, or you change the oil, that kind of stuff. So yeah, so the bioenergetic view is more holistic and makes you think about everything that is around you, because everything that can affect your function through the interference of energy production ultimately will affect your structure and your life and your longevity.
Yeah. So thinking about the things around us as being the way that we either synthesize energy or we deplete energy, what would you say is the reason to eat glucose or sugar and promote glucose metabolism instead of fat metabolism?
Well, out of the three macronutrients, proteins, glucose, and fats, glucose is the only macronutrient that was truly, looking at the structure of the cell, was truly meant to be oxidized, mostly oxidized. Protein, we can oxidize protein, but it's not a good thing. Even most mainstream doctors will tell you you should not be oxidizing amino acids as energy, because the process of converting them into energy involves a process of first converting them to glucose, and in order to convert it to glucose, we generate a lot of ammonia byproducts, which is coming from the amino acids. So that's ammonia is toxic. Nobody denies that. Any doctor will tell you that if you're oxidizing protein as fuel, you're asking for trouble. Kidney disease is probably one of the first things that's going to happen. But the ammonia is toxic to everything, especially the brain. And then, so the other macronutrient that I think now there's this war between, should we oxidize more fat or should we oxidize more glucose? And we see a lot of proponents of low carb, keto diets, etc. However, fatty acids, even in the two kinds, there's the saturated kind and also the unsaturated kind. And of the unsaturated kind, there are various types that are more or less unsaturated. And multiple studies going back at least 100 years have demonstrated that if you're eating primarily the unsaturated kinds of fats, they interfere directly with your production of energy. Even they interfere with their own oxidation to be converted to energy. And this was noticed, I think, in the early 1900s. Farmers, because the farmers want to maximize the so-called feed efficiency. So if they basically want to maximize the amount of weight an animal gains per unit of food eaten, right? Because it's cheaper for them. They want to, ideally, they want to feed the pig one leaf from a tree, or like one clump of grass, and they want the pig to grow enormous so they can sell it by the pound and make a lot of money. So they did a lot of experimenting with what kind of feed generates basically the largest amount of weight. And they found out that if you feed them saturated fats as basically as their source of fats, mostly found, such as fats mostly found in the butter or coconut oil or beef tallow, then the pigs stayed lean, no matter how much you fed them. Right, so you can feed them like the 4 to 5 times their daily caloric intake. The pigs do not grow. Their metabolic rate is very high. Their core temperature is very high. They're basically panting. They're getting dehydrated. Their metabolic rate is really, really high. So that's not something that the pig farmers want. They want actually a maximum. So they call this minimizing the feed efficiency. No matter how much you feed the pig, it does not put on weight. So they said, okay, let's try some other fats. And then they tried the fats in the olive oil, which are somewhat neutral. Like if you feed them really, really exorbitant amount of the fats, the monounsaturated fats that are found in olive oil, you do see some weight gain, but not nearly as much as what the farmers would want to do or would want to get. And finally, they started feeding the pigs fats that are found in seed. So basically seed oils, canola oil, rapeseed oil, cottonseed oil, soybean oil. And then they found that the pigs started to gain a massive amount of weight, mostly in the form of fat. And then they didn't know why, but they started adopting feeding these seed oils to the livestock, because it was very good for the farmers. They could basically fatten up a pig by giving it a very small amount of these seed oils. And these seed oils are coming as a waste product from the agricultural industry. And then around the, I think, 1950s or the 1960s, because the agricultural industry in the United States and most of the developed world grew tremendously because it was subsidized by the government, there was a massive amount of these seed oils that couldn't find any market. There was only, there was only so much that the livestock industry could consume, but there was still a tremendous amount of leftover. So then the agricultural industry approached the pharmaceutical industry and actually the medical industry and started asking them whether it would be possible to somehow come up with a theory or hypothesis. And actually, this is fully conspiratorial, but it's on the books, it's there. there was a meeting at a very high level between the representatives of the agriculture industry and pharma and various medical organizations saying, how can we sell people more seed oils? Because we have a ton of them and we don't want to throw it out, but it's rancid because the unsaturated fats go rancid very quickly. So we cannot really store it. We have to come up with something that allow us to sell a lot of that oil. And then the medical industry had realized that they did some studies earlier, which demonstrated that if you feed animals polyunsaturated oils, the blood levels of cholesterol drop. And that was right around the time when the cholesterol hypothesis of heart disease was basically being formed. So they decided that this was a perfect coincidence and said, "Oh, we're going to start selling seed oils to the general population, and we're going to tell them this is healthy for them because seed oils lower the amount of cholesterol in the blood." And you know, uh, as a result of that, as a corollary, we're going to tell people that seed oils basically prevent heart disease. Now, neither the cholesterol hypothesis of heart disease nor seed oils being helpful for preventing heart disease, none of this has ever been proven in a regular double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. It's never been tried. It's all been observational studies. And now, lately, the whole cholesterol hypothesis of heart disease is actually starting to disintegrate. Not many people know, but in 2018, FDA went on the record and said, we no longer think that dietary cholesterol is a problem. You should not restrict it. Or if you restrict it, they didn't say you should not. They said if you restrict it, it will have no effect on your risk of cardiovascular disease. So all of this work in the 50s and the 60s to start selling people seed oils turned out to be based on basically the flawed hypothesis of cholesterol. But the momentum remains because the public was so gaslighted in the 50s and 60s. There were even commercials for at the time housewives, and it was called Mazola Oil Your Men. Mazola Your Men. The Mazola is a very famous corn oil product sold by the millions of gallons all over the United States and the Western world, actually, and it's sold as a cooking oil. And we see this gradual transition starting from around the 1940s after the Second World War, and probably completing to about the 1960s, where the majority of the population went from eating saturated fats to eating polyunsaturated fats, mostly from seed oil. And instead of lowering rates of heart disease and cancer, we started seeing actually rates of these diseases increase almost in perfect match with the rising consumption of seed oils per capita. So basically, that's really and that alone should tell you that consuming these polyunsaturated fats is not a good idea. Now, when it comes to oxidizing them, even if we assume that the fats are perfectly healthy, so let's say you're eating entirely saturated fat diet, the fats are competing with glucose for oxidation into the cell because the pathways for converting both into energy are competitive with each other. They use about some of the same machinery. So if you're oxidizing too much of one type of macronutrient, let's say glucose, that suppresses your oxidation of fats. On the other hand, if you're oxidizing mostly fatty acids, that suppresses the oxidation of glucose. However, what happens, let's say, if you oxidize too much fat or most predominantly fat? Well, since the fats are going to be occupying this machinery for conversion of fat into energy, glucose will not be combusted, so it will remain in the body. And what does that mean? Well, we're going to start seeing glucose accumulate and guys basically spill over into the bloodstream from the cells because it cannot get metabolized. And this means you're going to get high blood glucose. So that's the definition of insulin resistance, or if it's severe enough, even diabetes. So right there, you have this thing called the Randle cycle or the Randle process, which kind of tells you that fats and glucose are competitive. But if you're oxidizing too much fat, you will not be able to oxidize the glucose that you're eating with the food, and that glucose will start building up, and you will meet the definition criteria for either insulin resistance or diabetes. So it shows you that if you're eating predominantly fat, you can make yourself diabetic. It's not something that mainstream medicine wants to admit, or the keto diet people or the low carb people want to admit, but it's been proven time and again. When you get people who are diabetic or insulin resistant, if you give them something that inhibits their supply of fat to the cell, in other words, put them on a low-fat diet, or inhibit the supply of fat to the cell from their own cells, which means through lipolysis, you give them anything that interferes with the supply of fat to the cell, their levels of blood glucose, which was what was used to diagnose as diabetic, the levels of blood glucose drop. So in other words, diabetes is a fat disease. It's not a glucose disease. What we see is the high glucose. It's a consequence or a symptom of the fact that basically we're oxidizing too much fat. Now, if you oxidize glucose, because it suppresses the oxidation of fats, basically when you oxidize glucose, you're getting, no toxic byproducts, which, by the way, you are getting from the oxidation of fat. And you're also creating more molecules of ATP and of carbon dioxide per molecule of glucose oxidized than when you oxidize a molecule of fat. So which means the glucose is not only safer for us, it also energetically better because we convert if it's properly oxidized. We're creating more energy and carbon dioxide from glucose than we are from the fats. And this is something that used to be common knowledge in the 60s and 70s. They studied in medical schools. Arendelle cycle was kind of coined around the early 60s. But if you go to any hospital now or talk to any doctor right now and ask them about the Arendelle cycle and what is diabetes, they'll tell you, I've never heard of Arendelle cycle. Diabetes is a disease of eating too much sugar. No, diabetes is a disease of not oxidizing sufficient amount of sugar. And that's why it builds up. And that's why we're seeing it in the bloodstream, and that's why some of it gets converted to lactate, which is also another biomarker of diabetes and cancer, by the way, and cardiovascular disease. So really, a lot of evidence going back very long time, which is probably why it was forgotten so well, or at least suppressed for so well, showing that you should be oxidizing primarily glucose. And if you interfere with the synthesis of glucose, that usually means you're oxidizing fats or proteins, worse. And if you're oxidizing the fats, chances are that even if they're fully saturated, it's going to result eventually some kind of a pathology simply because the fats are oxidation of fat proceeds very slowly. They don't generate enough as much energy as the glucose. And if they're of the unsaturated kind, they have all kinds of bad side effects, creating pro-inflammatory mediators such as the prostaglandins and the leukotrienes. And the unsaturated fats themselves, because of their chemical structure, they actually, have the effect of a steroid, and specifically the steroid estrogen. So polyunsaturated fats are estrogenic, and that's something that even mainstream doctors, if you're a male and you go to a doctor and say, "Hey, doctor, is high estrogen good for me?" They'll probably say no. No, if you're going to grow men boobs, it can cause cancer, a lot of bad things. Same thing for women, even though they say, when the woman is young, estrogen is good, but basically when the women get older, estrogen in certain tissue can become pathological, can cause breast cancer and whatnot. No, actually, if you're eating polyunsaturated fats, they'll be estrogenic no matter who eats them. And even without oxidizing them, they'll be causing a lot of damage. But if you're oxidizing them, the damage is even bigger, and that's why. And because of the Arendelle cycle and the fact that glucose does not generate any toxic byproducts, we're actually meant to oxidize primarily glucose. It's only at rest, when we're sleeping, where the muscles, especially the heart, prefer to oxidize fatty acids. But it's only at rest. As soon as some exertion starts to happen, such as waking up and starting to walk around and go to work and meet other people, you don't have to exercise. Just getting up and going about your day is already putting a requirement on the muscles to produce more energy than at rest. And because the process of fat oxidation is too slow to actually meet the requirements of your daily energetic demands, this means that the muscles prefer during activity to burn glucose. But if you're not giving them enough glucose, which would happen in a low carb diet, or you're giving too much fat, which will crowd out you will outcompete the oxidation of glucose, you will not be able to produce sufficient amount of energy, and it will initially manifest as fatigue, right? But over time, just like I said, the bioenergetics says you just interfered functionally with your metabolism. You're not producing sufficient amount of energy because you're interfering with the oxidation of glucose. Yes, fatigue you will feel immediately. But if this continues for a sufficiently long period of time, you will get an actual chronic disease. Usually starts with obesity, insulin resistance, and diabetes, but eventually progresses into things that are potentially lethal, like heart disease or cardiovascular disease or the dementia such as Alzheimer's. Any chronic disease you can come up with, it has its roots in initially interfering with the oxidative phosphorylation of glucose.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so if someone learns the oxidizing fat isn't good, particularly PUFA, and they're avoiding fat, they're increasing their carb intake, what could be an issue if the person is still eating glucose, like sugar, fruit, honey, starch potentially, and they're still having issues of low energy? So essentially, like, what's going on in terms of the actual like energy production when someone still feels low energy with glucose?
Um, because of their, if they've consumed a lot of a high fat diet, or especially a high PUFA diet, polyunsaturated fatty acids, for a long time, these fatty acids have a direct inhibitory effect on the thyroid. And because the thyroid is ultimately the hormone that controls the speed and the intensity of the production of energy from the raw materials, they could have basically hypothyroidism. And even if it's not detectable on actual blood tests, because usually the standard blood test for hypothyroidism is TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone. And you go to the doctor and you ask them to measure it, and it comes back within the range. The doctor says, no, you're not hypothyroid. Couple of things. First of all, for about 30 years, they had a range of TSH, normal range, which now they have actually shortened. And suddenly, if you had a TSH of, let's say, 4 or 5 a couple of years ago, you'll be declared normal thyroid or euthyroid. But now, if you have the exact same values, they'll say you are hypothyroid. So actually, we have had, by definition, by the new rules, we've had an epidemic of hypothyroidism for a very, very long time. Now they've lowered the upper limit of the range from, I think, 6 to 4, and that's now creating a newly diagnosed many hypothyroid people. But even at the range, I think the normal range is like from like 0.1 to 4. Even in that range, if your TSH is over 1, chances are you're going to have some problems, because it's been shown that the healthiest people, the ones who have the lowest risk of chronic disease, infectious disease, and also live the longest, have TSH below 2. So if your TSH comes back in the range of 2 to 4, which is now defined as a normal range, you will not be diagnosed with hypothyroidism, even though multiple human studies have shown that, despite us declaring this normal state, this is actually pathological, and over time you will develop disease unless your TSH drops below 1. Below 1 is probably best for everybody. But most doctors are not going to catch that. They go by the normal range. So if you've consumed a high fat diet, or especially high PUFA diet, for a long time, and especially if you've also combined extraneous exercise with that particular diet, chances are that you may suppress your thyroid to the point where basically your metabolic rate has gone down. And the metabolic rate does go down when you consume mostly fat as calories and when you exercise, because when your metabolic rate is high, if you combine this with exhaustive exercise, this has the potential to create a lot of tissue damage. And when you're strenuously exercising, the levels of the thyroid hormone in the blood drop to prevent basically the tissue catabolizing itself. So if you're a very active athlete, while you're an active athlete, everything seems fine. You're lean, you're muscular, everything's great, but that's usually in your 20s. Most athletes are not very active after their 30s, and there's a reason for that. But invariably, almost every single one, the moment they stop their athletic career, they gain massive amounts of weight despite not changing their diet. So what could be going on here? Well, while there were these active athletes, as counterintuitive as it is, they're actually extremely hypothyroid, and this has been shown multiple times. Because of their intense exercise routine, the levels of thyroid hormone are very low, and in fact, while they're in this active career, this strenuous exercise combined with potentially high fat diet that they're eating is keeping their thyroid suppressed. So when they stop, the body has adjusted to a much lower metabolic rate, which is suitable for their athletic regimen. But when they stop and no longer exercise, now the body actually, you give it the same amount of calories as before, but because of the lack of exercise, you're not burning them out through stress, but now all of these calories are accumulating. And then these people start getting massive amounts of weight despite eating a normal calorie diet. And the doctor says, no, you need to exercise more, you need to move more, and you eat less. Well, they're already eating a normal 2,000 calorie diet. Why do they need to eat less? So the issue here is like, why am I gaining fat on the same diet that I used to eat before? And I did not gain fat back then. Well, you were burning this excessive calories for something else. But, I think most people would agree that running yourself to death 7 days a week is not the way to burn. It's probably not a good way to burn the extra calories. Our ancestors did not do that. They were lean. They were living, a lot of them into the 80s and 90s and even 100s, and did not really, get fat they actually ate more calories than we do. They moved less than we do, and they were slimmer on average than us. So something else is going on, and the bioenergetic theory says, well, while you were doing the strenuous regimen and eating the poor diet, you suppress your thyroid, which means your basal metabolic rate is now much lower. So when you stop doing the exercise, the basal metabolic rate stays low because your thyroid is still suppressed. And now, if you're eating the same amount of calories as before, but there's nothing, because the basal metabolic rate is low and there's no exercise to burn the excess. Now, of course, you're going to get fat. So I think that people who are having trouble eating a high carb diet and gaining weight, I would advocate that they do a full thyroid panel, TSH, but also the T4 and T3 and reverse T3. These are the thyroid hormones, but not the free ones, which most doctors test, but the total ones. Same thing for testosterone. You go to a doctor and say, I want a testosterone test. Most doctors will test your free testosterone, which is not the measurement you want. You want the total testosterone because it's the total testosterone that demonstrates how well your gonadal organs work. Same thing for the thyroid. You want the total T4, you want the total T3, and then you want the reverse T3, and you want the TSH. Chances are that if somebody is gaining weight on a high carb diet, which also has limited amount of fat, chances are that they're severely hypothyroid. And then also, when the TSH comes back in range, I can show you these studies that show that if your TSH is above 2, you are not healthy. It does not matter that your TSH is in range. So this is something that needs to be addressed. And now I think doctors are starting to change their mind. They're saying, okay, let me measure your core temperature, let me see your pulse, and then if your resting pulse after eating is not at least 85, and if your waking temperature is not at least 98 before eating, and it does not rise to 98.5, 99 after eating, then you have a thyroid problem. Your basal metabolic rate is too low, and you will gain weight even if you keep that high carb, low fat diet. But still, you will gain less weight than if you're eating, a high fat, low carb diet.
Yeah. Okay. So if we've had this like PUFA accumulation from eating like poor diet over time, what would you recommend to kind of facilitate the process of getting back into glucose metabolism?
I would basically, I would do the test for the thyroid and also do a test for the different steroids. A lot of the people who have done like the high fat diet and strength exercise, they're also hypogonadal. And that's a downstream effect of the hypothyroidism because the function of the gonads is also ultimately controlled by thyroid. So if it's a male that basically, is struggling with gaining weight, I will do the test, and you will see that usually the testosterone levels and the cortisol levels. So the cortisol levels will be higher than optimal, and testosterone or DHEA, which is a precursor to androgens and estrogens. So the cortisol to DHEA, the cortisol to testosterone ratio will be above optimal for either sex. So if it's the cortisol to DHA works for both sexes, male and female, and the cortisol to testosterone is more applicable to males. But let's say the cortisol to DHA ratio, by the way, has been demonstrated to be the most reliable predictor of all-cause mortality and morbidity than any other one, which means that if the ratio of your stress hormone cortisol to one of your anti-stress hormones, which is DHEA, is above optimal, in other words, in favor of cortisol, then basically, you're going to have problems with your health. And one of the first signs of these problems with your health is that you're going to start to gain weight, especially around the midsection. So if the cortisol to DHEA ratio is above 0.3, you have a problem with your steroids, usually driven by a thyroid dysfunction. But if the thyroid is coming back normal, which almost never is if the cortisol to DHA ratio is above 0.3, then basically, there may be, some rationale for taking things that can lower that ratio. So in other words, shift it in favor of DHEA. Aspirin is a very good regimen. It inhibits the synthesis of cortisol, but also lowers inflammation. And one of the reasons a lot of people have higher cortisol is because they have higher baseline inflammation from eating a lot of this PUFA, which is itself inflammatory. So basically, if person has been on a high PUFA diet for a long time, I will try to cut down or at least limit the dietary PUFA to as close to zero as possible. Maybe take some aspirin and maybe take some vitamin E, which over time will help because there's always some excretion of the PUFA going on from your fat stores. It will help the liver, which processes most of these circulating fatty acids. It will help the liver take this PUFA and convert it to something that your kidneys can excrete through the urine. And that's a process going to take a while. I mean, the half-life of the fatty acids in your tissues is actually 2 years, which means that it will take about 4 years, unfortunately, for you to get rid of most of these fatty acids that have accumulated in your tissues. But I've seen people that even after 1 year on a regimen of avoiding PUFA dietary as much as possible and taking a tablet of aspirin daily or some vitamin E daily, I've seen them, improve dramatically, and many of them have had like reversal of atherosclerotic plaques in their arteries. They've gone to the doctor. The doctor said, like, I don't know what you're doing. Keep doing it because you no longer have the signs of heart disease. Or their blood pressure was high before and now it's lower. Or they had heart palpitations and now they didn't. Or they basically had a high blood glucose before and now they didn't. It was normalized. So all of these are signs that your metabolism is improving and that your health is improving. How exactly how long is going to take? I don't know. I'm just saying that these are the measurements that have been done on fatty tissue in various people. So for some people it could take at least 2 years to feel a good response. But in my experience, most people feel better even within the first week of trying to avoid the polyunsaturated fats.
Right. Yeah. There's been talk of going on a almost zero fat diet and just protein and carb to actually deplete the PUFA faster. Would you ever recommend that in any situation?
I would say probably not for most people. I don't think it would be dangerous. It's just um, I tried it. In my experience, it makes you very very hungry. I think because it raises your basal metabolic rate, so you have the tendency to snack on things that are not necessarily good for you. So basically, if your basal metabolic rate is very high, you're going to be hungry every couple of hours. So if you're in, let's say, corporate environment or anywhere in an office environment, I mean, I cannot call off a meeting and say, "Time out! I need to go get my, I don't know, milkshake or whatnot, or beefsteak." Right? I'm going to reach for some kind of a snack from the cabinet. And it's probably going to be some chips, which is laden with PUFA or something else, because you need those calories to sustain yourself when you really have a very high metabolism. This can be seen in babies. They eat every couple of hours, and if you don't feed them, they get extremely cranky. They start crying, they're throwing fits. They're basically very agitated. The same thing happens in adults with a very high metabolic rate. If you don't eat, when you need it, and you don't have stores, then your stress hormones will rise in order to provide those missing calories. They're going to come out from your fat stores and from your muscles and other places, and that process basically sours up your mood because those stress hormones reduce the oxidative metabolism. And like I said, even a minor drop of the energy levels in the brain can cause really bad changes in mood to the point of people being very aggressive and attacking others. So obviously, you don't want that in an office environment. So if you're eating a completely fat-free diet, and unless you have food with yourself, which is also cannot really happen in a corporate meeting, you will tend to overeat with crappy things. So maybe you can try this when you're on vacation, if you can afford, like, let's say, about a month vacation. I remember posting a study on one of the forums that if you do the completely fat-free diet, they did it with monkeys for about 30 days. That led to the depletion of these polyunsaturated fatty acids. So I think that's what this discussion is based on. There's one study that said that you don't have to wait 2 years or 4 years. You can do it in 30 days, but you have to eat basically zero fat. So if you're in an environment where tolerates that, where you can eat every couple of hours, and you can have access to good food, you don't have to eat chips and other crappy commercial food, then you can try it, especially if you have problems with excess weight. But if it's if your weight is not that problematic, I think you shouldn't go to such extremes. And I found that about 10% of calories for me need to be fat, or otherwise if I have this feeling of, I don't know, dissatisfaction. I mean, I feel satiety, so I don't want to eat more. Yet I still this kind of like a lingering feeling of not hunger, but I'm always thinking like, well, should I eat more, or do I need to eat more, or like, am I satiated? Am I hungry? So at least for me, 10% of calories need to be fat. If I drop below that, I start looking for food when I should not be eating, and that to me is a sign that my body needs it's 10% fat. So that's currently the diet. I'm probably about 15, but anything more than 20% for a person who is carrying extra weight is probably not advisable.
Right. Um, yeah, there's this idea that increasing metabolism is something that actually ends up making people kind of more like neurotic or stressful once they understand how big an effect that stress has on them.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of people now getting into raised work or just the idea of metabolism who I think almost get sort of more obsessive about their health issues. And it's an interesting thing because obviously, we the goal would be to have the exact opposite, to really just be resilient to the stress. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
The only time I've seen a person with high metabolism have a problem with resiliency to stress is that, again, if they didn't eat enough. So but if they're well fed, they're invariably much more resistant to stress. And I've seen it myself. If I drink my milkshake before a stressful meeting, I'm probably the only one who actually, towards the end of the meeting, is not scribbling something in his notes, trying to pretend that still paying attention, asking questions, being engaged. So in my experience, good metabolism increases resilience to stress. However, it does make you intolerant to a lot of manipulative and generally unhealthy behavior from people around you. So you may actually feel a tendency to snap out, at least respond to situations where your metabolism is low. Your inner voice then is saying, "Oh, hey, look, you don't have enough energy to cope with that. You might as well lower your head and take it, or basically like ignore it. Don't get involved with that." When you have the energy to do it, I've noticed that you also have the tendency to engage people that are destructive to the community, or to you specifically, or the people around you. So you may become more confrontational. I don't think you become more irritable. It's more about if I see something bad in my environment, I want to fix it and I have the energy to fix it, so I'm going to take the steps to fix it. When you're low in energy, which a lot of people mistake patience for something, being very good, it's not. It's not. Patience is actually driven by serotonin. And while a certain amount of patience at some point is probably useful, being eternally patient is definitely not a good idea. It means you basically ended up in what we call learned helplessness, and you're willing to just wait it out. But guess what? With every minute that you wait it out, it's another minute of your life that passes by completely wasted. So that's really what the trade-off of the high to low energy metabolism brings about. You feel much more engaged and fruitful and purposeful, but you also feel much more what should I call it? Challenged and provoked by toxic people around you.
Right. Yeah, I think I heard Ray say somewhere that the amount of like pregnenolone and DHEA and progesterone you have circulating is the thing that will give you the resistance to say no to the toxic things around you, something to that effect. And
Yeah.
it's totally been the case for me and others I see. It's just you don't really have an ability to face the stressors of life, and it really is you're turning inward and you're conserving energy instead of moving forward.
Precisely.
And
Yeah,
it makes
you
sense.
basically covering. It's the ostrich algorithm. You're burying your head in the sand and you're hoping to wait it out. So I think there's a misnomer when a lot of people think stress resistance, they think of basically how long they can sit there and take it, the abuse, right? Before something bad happens, and that's not a good measure of health. You should not be tolerating bad things happening around you, especially if they're focused on you. Resistance to stress really means that if something is toxic and bad is happening to you or around you or to people you care about, that you have the energy to actually resist that bad thing. In other words, push back, right? Establish boundaries. That's actually a better, in my opinion, a better view of resistance to stress than the common view of resistance, which really means that, oh, I can endure it all. Just throw it my way. I can endure it all. No, that's not a good sign. That's actually a sign that serotonin is high, and you're patient, but not for the good reasons. You're patient simply because you feel that you cannot muster up the energy to respond properly to the threat, to the stressor.
Yeah, this is a thing that I've been thinking a little bit about recently, is that I think that understanding to avoid things that are stressful can actually be detrimental at times. There's times that I see people can't go too long without food, can't exercise because it's too stressful, can't do X thing because it's too stressful, when really they have this sort of intuition or gut feeling that they need to be doing something, yet they still avoid it for the stress. So
Yep.
I tend to think that there is a situation where someone can have a sort of mission or vision that they're going towards, and the biological effects, I think they can be dealt with when it's for a meaningful cause. And that's an interesting thing, I think, with you in particular. I mean, I know you're a really busy guy, and people I see online will say, how come Georgie doesn't look like a Greek god if Ray's ideas work so well? And it's an interesting discussion because
Look behind me.
yeah.
Georgia has two full-time jobs and a family to take care of.
Yeah.
And I am the sole bread earner. So when people start working 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, then we can talk about how people look and how they do it. I want to see them come in my environment and try to live even if just for a few days and see how many of them will be willing to stay,
Right.
let alone endure it, for a long period of time.
Well, I think it makes a person like question what health is, because I think you can look at the appearance and think that that determines a lot, or you could even look at the physical ailments, lack of that. But I've started to think really that the resistance to stress and the level of consciousness is really what matters more necessarily than the appearance or whatnot. And it's an interesting thing because you'll look at these guys that are like bodybuilders or people who care about looking good. A lot of them are just like complete like they're loitering essentially and not really getting too much done. But I do think the consciousness or what you're doing essentially is more indicative of the health. Like I don't. How would you personally define health?
Well, just to mention the bodybuilders, I don't know if you've seen the news. Many of them, actually, by the way, they have a higher than the average mortality rate. So yeah, they look great, but many of them are injecting these not particularly beneficial steroids. They're going on these restrictive diets and whatnot. So yeah, they may look great, but health-wise, very few bodybuilders are actually really healthy. It's not a coincidence that most of them avoid posting any blood work done on themselves online. Try to approach a competitive bodybuilder online that has a large following and basically study how that person is a Greek god. Ask them, give me your blood work about cholesterol, lipids, carbon dioxide, steroids. Especially like the male ones. If it's a male that we're talking about, the more often than not, in fact, in virtually all cases that I've tried to do it, they refuse. They say no. I have my following, and they trust me, and that's all that matters. So I don't think it's a coincidence. I have posted my blood results. I mean, I used to look and feel much worse when I was in my worst condition back in circa 2009, 2011. So I can post pictures from there, and I think some people found them online. I certainly looked worse than I do look now. But it's also the age factor. I'm in my mid 40s. Most of the people that are running these, influencing, mostly influencers that are looking good, they're in their 20s and early 30s. I don't know of many people my age that are still running an influencer kind of type of business. The age takes toll on all of us, and chronic stress, makes that worse. I certainly have. I would like to say more chronic stress than the average person on the street. A lot of it's by choice, but a lot of it is not. When you have a family these days, especially if you're the only person, paying all the bills in the family, you really cannot fail. I exist in an environment that does not forgive failure, not even once. So that can put a big weight on me and can change the way I look. So yeah, as far as optimal health, I think resilience to stress, but that's hard to gauge because we're not around that person most of the time. Other things, I think creativity is actually a very good indicator. So if the person is involved in any kind of a creative activity, if let's say if a musician or a painter and whatnot, you can see it in their artwork. A lot of people that are they're not that have been celebrated as great artists. Some people looked at their, either the music that they composed or the paintings and said, something off-putting about this piece of art. I don't know what it is. Then turns out that person had schizophrenia or like cancer or some other thing. So I think the quality of your artwork and how appealing it is to the average person can be a very good indicator. What else? I mean, I would say, quality of sleep. Like if you're sleeping through the night without waking up, and you're waking up refreshed instead of groggy and barely dragging yourself out of bed, I think that's a great sign. But it usually only knowable to yourself and the people in your immediate surrounding. Other things. I don't know. I guess like the tolerance to things that basically that should be irritating to most people. So again, tolerance to bad things around you does not indicate good metabolism. Resistance and the ability to resist those things and to change them for the better, that's the indication of a good metabolism, of good health. And if you want to do blood tests, and I think levels of basically again cortisol to DHEA, very good indicator for both sexes. Levels of pregnenolone and progesterone, even the tests for those in blood are not very reliable. Testosterone levels for males, progesterone levels for females. For females, the progesterone to the estrogen ratio is very important. It needs to be at least 200 to 1 in favor of progesterone, and also determines the resilience to stress. So there are quite a few different things that can be tried. I don't know of a single thing that can really tell you if a person is healthy or not, other than when you're having discussions with this person, does this person irritate you? To me, that's been a very good indicator whether the person on the other side is healthy, including their mental health. Some people may look physically very healthy, but they can be psychopaths. It's very common in the corporate world, and I deal with a lot of these types. So for me, lately, it's become the rule of 5 minutes. If within 5 minutes this person does not irritate me, um, I usually think that's a person in good health, person we can work with. And I try to be, especially in corporate meetings, you cannot be aggressive or attack or insult the other person. I'm very docile and usually silent during the first 5 minutes so that I can allow that other person to expose themselves. So that's my test. If they do not irritate the hell out of me within the first 5 minutes, which by the way is very rare, then I think this person is healthy and we can do work together. And so far, it has been proven to be the case. I work with very few people together. I just don't have the tolerance for I don't know, not necessarily stupidity because I don't want to say that I'm smart yet as stupid, but it's just incompatibility, and a lot of that incompatibility comes from the mismatch in health. I don't know if you've seen that study, but they proved that it works in couples. So basically, the couples that have the biggest longevity in their relationship were the ones that had the smallest discrepancy between their average health. And I think they picked like 20 different biomarkers: cholesterol, full blood count, vitamin D, carbon dioxide, metabolic panel, whatnot. And basically, the ones that broke it off almost immediately were the ones that had the biggest delta. That one was relatively much more healthy than the other. This manifested, this difference in health manifested in also complete intolerance of being around each other. So if you are around another person, that person is really getting on your nerves, or you're getting on his or her nerves, chances are there's a big discrepancy into the relative health between these two people. So it's better if you just don't engage.
Yeah, if you think of it like that sort of irritating individual having a kind of repression or conservating of energy,
Yeah.
and you really like I tend to see things in terms of the higher flow, the more intense flow, and the lower flow of energy. It really is just a balance between those two levels, and I think that it could mainly be looked at hormonally. I don't know what you would say to that, but I think a lot of people will see someone looking at a hormone level and say, okay, this doesn't have anything to do with the real situation. I mean, but I tend to think that in all cases that I've seen, things have been able to be explained on a hormonal level, and
Oh,
it's,
absolutely.
it's quite striking.
Every steroid is also a neurosteroid, and even mainstream medicine is now recognizing that. They know that estrogen and progesterone are neurosteroids for women. In other words, steroids that, even though may not be produced there, they act on the brain and they change the mood. And they, even though there's some resistance to that idea, but now even urologists, which are the male doctors, are starting to recognize the same thing about male hormones. They notice that men with very high testosterone, despite the fact that medicine says these people should have problems with their prostate, should be losing their hair, they should be really aggressive and agitated and dangerous to be around, they found the exact opposite. And conversely, when testosterone levels drop, that's when usually they start seeing irritability, depression in males, obviously poor sexual function, poor cognition, and all of these disappear if the males get back on a get put on a testosterone replacement therapy. So almost everything you can see, it's controllable by hormones, but ultimately controlled by thyroid. And back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, they used to be like the common treatment for that. They called them the insanities because they didn't have these segregated diseases that we now have. Now we now have like, I don't know, 200 different conditions, each one with a specific name and treatment and whatnot and symptoms. Back in the day, they called them insanities. Or the dementias, and usually they go hand in hand. And a common treatment was giving people thyroid, natural desiccated thyroid, the thyroid gland powder, and it had a cure rate of 60 to 70%. 60 to 70. That's unthinkable. Not only is it unthinkable these days, but these days you're never told that you're cured. You're basically given medication to manage the symptoms, and you're in remission. So they keep trying to scare you that if you stop taking the medications, you'll fall back right to where you were. But back in the 50s and 60s, they actually had a cure rate of 60 to 70% of what they called insanities with nothing but giving thyroid. Lately, it has been replicated with giving testosterone to males, with progesterone to females. Actually, testosterone to females as well. Also, very powerful antidepressant, very powerful antipsychotic. And I think little by little, this information is becoming more widely known that basically the steroids control who you are and how you behave as a person. There's a lot of research in psychology about basically the so-called aggressive male phenotype, which they used to think is due to high testosterone. The high T male, the aggressive, the conqueror, the murderer, the rapist, and whatnot. Turns out that it's the exact opposite. It's basically, and it was the cortisol to testosterone ratio that predicted all of these pathological traits in males. In other words, if the cortisol to testosterone ratio was higher than 30 in favor of cortisol, then the male was, one or more of these bad things that psychology studies. But if the cortisol to testosterone ratio drops, in other words, in favor of testosterone, all of these things disappear. So what we do and what we are, and the way we behave and the way we're perceived by others, by behavior or even smell, is due to these hormones, who are also pheromones. Males with high levels of testosterone tend to get rated as better smelling by heterosexual females, even if those males haven't showered for a week. So it's not. So it kind of challenges our idea of like what clean really means. Back in, I think one of the first words for cleanliness from Latin, actually the root of the word was health. So clean really meant healthy. And that's how it seems to be in human relationships. You may be very dirty, but if you look in good health and if you smell good to people pheromonally, they're willing to ignore a lot of these other things that we as a society culture have labeled as bad, such as, maybe not showering for a few days or not shaving like me for a few days. It turns out that these are of secondary importance and also mostly cultural, not physiological. People have this innate ability to assess health based on these pheromonal cues, and most of these are driven by the hormones themselves because they themselves are pheromones. And you excrete them through your sweat and your saliva and whatnot, and people can smell them. So on that level, we're not different than animals who basically determine the mating period by the scent, both the male and the female. They don't really have any other visual clues. Some animals do, but for most of them, it's based on smell. And it looks like we humans are the same way.
Yeah, amazing. So you talk a lot about Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, even depression and anxiety, and their connection to serotonin, nitric oxide, essentially just the stress hormones and low energy production systemically. So what do you think we could do at a large scale to deal with these issues, especially in the young kids? I mean, we're seeing earlier and earlier these diseases or conditions arise.
Dietarily, I think, well, first of all, I would completely get rid of the SSRI drugs. They're the ones who increase your extracellular serotonin on purpose because medicine to this day, psychiatry specifically, keeps claiming that depression and many other conditions, including autism, are somehow due to a deficiency of serotonin in the brain. Yet, all the autopsies done on people who committed suicide, who had clinical depression while alive, demonstrate very, very high levels of serotonin and its metabolites in both the brain and the cerebrospinal fluid. So, and now lately, I don't know if you've seen the studies that I've been posting over the last year or so, large circles inside of psychiatry are starting to say, we got it wrong. It's serotonin is not high, it's not low in depression, it's actually high. And we need to start changing our opinion of that. But of course, there's a huge pushback from another circle within psychiatry, which is usually sponsored by Big Pharma, says, no, we don't have a conclusive proof. Well, you're not going to have conclusive proof unless you start, I don't know, doing mass autopsies on these people that are committing suicide from depression. It's just not that many. And by the way, in order to make it conclusive, you need to do autopsies on people who basically did not die from suicide from depression. And you just don't have these two groups, at least not randomly selected. So it's really a very convenient situation for the pharma companies to continue selling these serotonergic drugs, while conveniently hoping that the public will forget the fact that when the first SSRI, Prozac, was approved in the United States in the late 80s, from what I remember, for years, I think for up to a decade, several other countries, including Germany, I think was the most notable one, not only refused to approve Prozac for depression, but actually had a warning printed on the label that this thing can cause depression in the first 2 weeks of usage, and actually drastically increases your risk of suicide. So why would you even take a drug? Why would you take a drug that's being marketed as something that would prevent the suicide if it actually increases the risk of suicide, at least in the first 2 weeks? And this situation continued for a long time until Big Pharma, basically through mergers and acquisitions, became this large international conglomerate, and basically different countries didn't really matter. So Pfizer has presence in the United States, but also in Germany, and also in China, and also in other countries in Asia. So if any country individual tries to revolt and say we don't like this particular drug, Pfizer is big enough to exert influence in that specific country and make them accept it. And that's what happened with Germany. Eventually, they accepted Prozac, but for a long time, it was the only country that had a black box warning on Prozac saying that we're not certain that this drug works better than placebo. Not only that, but we know that this drug increases suicide risk in the first 2 weeks of usage, and we're not certain that this drug actually treats depression. So the combination of these three things should tell any reasonable thinking person, then why am I taking this drug? Why is the doctor prescribing it? Anyways, but Pfizer got it the way they wanted it, and now these drugs are everywhere, and we're seeing an epidemic of autism, and I think that's a direct result of that. There's also the chronic stress, right? But ultimately, how do we decrease serotonin in the general population? First step, get rid of the SSRIs. There are multiple drugs for depression already approved that are not only non-serotonergic, they actually act in a way opposite to serotonin. One of them is Myanserin. It's a serotonin antagonist. Another one is Tianeptine. It actually works as a selective serotonin reuptake enhancer, directly opposite to what the SSRI drugs do. So we have evidence that actually drugs that work in a way opposite to serotonin are very, very potent antidepressants. So we can get rid of the SSRIs. At the very least, if people want to keep taking drugs, give them these anti-serotonergic ones. Second step, change the dietary pattern, or at least do a dietary additive that will inhibit the uptake of tryptophan, which is the precursor to serotonin, inhibit the uptake of tryptophan from the diet. And gelatin, it seems to be like a very good tool for that, because the amino acid, first of all, gelatin does not contain any tryptophan. So if you're eating a decent amount of gelatin, let's say a spoon with each meal, basically you're going to, and not only it doesn't have any tryptophan, but interferes with your absorption of tryptophan from the food. So you're going to decrease the amount of tryptophan in your system, which means less serotonin will be produced. That's the second thing. And third thing is, probably the hardest, will be avoidance of chronic stress. Every time you get stressed, your basically cortisol rises and you're shredding muscle tissue, and muscle tissue is composed of amino acids, and they have a high amount of tryptophan in them. So every time you basically under chronic stress and there's a muscle breakdown as a result, you will flood the bloodstream with tryptophan. That tryptophan will travel to the brain, and over there it will get converted to serotonin, and also peripherally too. And serotonin, if we assume that serotonin is the cause of autism and depression and psychosis and many of other these things, and now there's very strong evidence for that, then basically chronic stress will probably over time give you at least one of these conditions unless you mitigate it somehow. And the way you mitigate it is aspirin has been shown to lower the levels of serotonin in the blood. That's probably the easiest things that anybody can do. But really, what I was trying to say is that we have to try to somehow decrease chronic stress. Ultimately, there is no foolproof defense against it if it continues for a long period of time. You may be taking aspirin, you may be taking vitamin E, you may be taking anti-serotonin drugs. Ultimately, this is patchwork because stress has a systemic effect. And the only way to lower that systemic effect is to lower the exposure to stress. So my advice, even though I don't give advice, my opinion at least is that, I think people should stop worrying so much about money and start worrying more about their health, because even with everything that modern medicine has to offer, by the way, it turns out it's not that much, but it's very expensive. You will not be able to get your health back from through modern medicine if you get severely sick, no matter how much money you have.
Right. Yeah. I just want to kind of transition it. So, like, thinking of Ray's main thesis of energy and structure are interdependent at every level. So if everything good in life essentially comes from an efficient flow of energy, how do you view the connection between metabolism and the idea of God?
Most of the people who had a so-called religious experience or some kind of a life-altering experience, have been usually did it under the influence of psychedelics, and those psychedelics invariably have anti-serotonin effect, partial. The actual psychedelic experience is due to activation of a particular serotonin receptor, but the rest of the activity of these psychedelics, such as ayahuasca or LSD, or even the magic mushrooms with their component psilocybin, um, they actually have predominantly anti-serotonin effect, which means these people are going to be in a very good energetic state. And I don't know of many poor people, not poor, but many chronically sick people who have these epiphanies or this feeling of being of oneness with God and the universe and whatnot. So I think in order to have the proper healthy um, outlook or resonance with the divine, you have to be in good health. Because if you don't have that, then it remains all a language and basically an analytical thought, and that has been shown to really kind of like separate you from the environment. You view the world as an enemy. You view the world as a threat, and you start analyzing all of these things, trying to protect yourself from them. But that's a sign of high serotonin. The people who do best in life are the people who are creative, adaptive, and resilient. And for that, serotonin is actually a poison for all of these things. So the idea of God to me, if it's a healthy idea, not something that's dogmatic and trying to be imposed, usually comes from people who are with a very healthy metabolism and a very good state of health. There are some exceptions to that, but invariably, even the very sick ones that I've been reading about historically turn out to be using substances that have the anti-serotonergic effect. So if you want to be one with God, you got to keep serotonin low. That's my
Yeah.
take on it.
It's quite interesting because I see like Heraclitus and William Blake and Ray as sort of these thinkers that really just promote the flow of energy idea, and I tend to think that that is the connection with the divine. There really is
The
something
imagination.
that
William Blake said that. So basically, we are the emanation of the divine, but more specifically, our imagination is the actual divine. And if you want to have wild and vivid and creative and productive imagination, for that, serotonin needs to be kept low. All the people, the creative people who try to stimulate their creativity and whatnot, if you look at the things that we're using, they were all anti-serotonergic in origin. And to this day, basically, there's primitive cultures. I don't know what we call them primitive. They seem to be very, very advanced, maybe not technologically, but they seem to be, really with it, have a firm grasp on the world, and be one with it. So if you look at some of the tribal tribes that are in North America and South America, they continue to use these psychedelics, and these are all invariably anti-serotonergic systemically. So when serotonin is low, imagination, which to William Blake was the actual divine, and we people were the emanation, the material emanation of the divine, then that's when it works best. So if we are the sort of like the container, or the material tool through which the divine manifests itself into the world, we can only resonate with it and extract its energy when serotonin is low.
right. Yeah, it's something I think it is also a thing that people just need to understand can be just supported through good life and stimulating food, the right diet, and just the right experience. Because I tend to see people now in like the spiritual spheres or whatever. It's always a focus on the psychoactive drugs. But really, it seems like a lot of it can be replicated through the dietary means and also
Yep.
these substances, like you say, just things to lower serotonin. It really is that simple.
And for most people, the serotonin overload, aside from chronic stress, comes from the diet, because if they're eating diet that's not properly digested, which is, by the way, those are the official recommendations, we are being told to eat diets that are poorly digestible, right, to limit the uptake of sugar into the body. So there's a lot of recommendation on resistant starches and all kinds of other foods that are, not well cooked, so that they don't digest very well. So when you do that, you're basically feeding off your bacteria, which is mostly in the colon, and the bacteria produce a substance, endotoxin, which is now tied to every chronic disease that we know of. But one of its main effects, actually two main effects, are it directly increases the production of serotonin and nitric oxide, and 90% of your serotonin is produced in the gut. So eating poor diet essentially responsible for 90% of the serotonin that we are producing and preventing us from being one with the divine. Chronic stress is probably the other 10%.
Right. Yeah. Um, I think something that's important now is that a lot of people are like finding out about this framework and experimenting with different like pro-metabolic substances, particularly the youth hormones, so like pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA, and it seems like a lot of people are confused about dosing. So I think it would be good to like walk through the difference in dosing. So like for say like pregnenolone, like a dose between like 30 and 50 compared to a dose of like 100 to 200 milligrams, that is, and then also with like a even smaller dose.
20 to 50 happens, I think it's a physiological dose. Young people before puberty produce at least 30 milligrams of pregnenolone daily. So if it's just for maintenance purposes, I think 30 milligrams is fine, 30 to 50. But if the person has a chronic problem, let's say excess cortisol or low androgens or low progesterone, I think the doses of 100 to 150 milligrams may be better, especially when combined with aspirin, because aspirin limits the conversion of the pregnenolone or even the steroids that are already in the body, limits their conversion into both estrogen and cortisol, both of which are stress hormones. So if you take an aspirin, you're going to be allowing more of that pregnenolone to go towards the androgens or progesterone or DHA or even stay as pregnenolone, which is preferable to conversion into cortisol and estrogen. So pregnenolone and aspirin, I think, is a great combination. I'm surprised that hasn't been more widely marketed yet, and especially if you take it also with niacinamide, because niacinamide turns into something called NAD plus, and NAD plus is a cofactor, a required cofactor for the conversion of pregnenolone into all the downstream hormones. So pregnenolone with niacinamide and a little bit of aspirin is probably one of the fundamental tools that we have against stress, and just increasing resilience in general.
Yeah, and I think also people are kind of confused about DHEA. I hear people report that even in really small doses, DHEA will give them like estrogen-like symptoms or gyno-like development. And I'm just curious what you would do to sort of mitigate that, or just maybe even just understand like what's the issue going on.
So I set up a lab that measures steroids in hair, and we've done some experiments. Even in very energetically compromised people, very hypothyroid or chronically sick with something, including cancer, 5 milligrams of DHA daily did not raise estrogen at all. So it just stayed as DHA, got converted downstream into other hormones, predominantly the androgens, not the estrogens. So it's very difficult for a physiological amount of DHEA, which is about 5 milligrams daily, to raise estrogen to the point where it's going to cause problems. We have not seen that even in very sick people. And in healthy people, the risk is even lower. So I know people who are taking up to 15 milligrams of DHA daily, and there is no change into their estrogen levels, not at least not statistically significant. But when we're taking lower doses, such as 5 to 6 milligrams once daily, there is zero change in the estrogens, even non statistically significant.
Yeah, nice. Okay, because again, like online, there's just always complaints of, okay, I take pregnenolone, it gives me like facial bloating, puffiness, stuff that it would supposedly reduce,
Yeah.
theoretically, but it's always just a weird discussion, and I think it needs more talk, essentially, of just how to make them work well.
Or more
And
context, they
like,
could be taking a contaminated supplement. Many people don't realize it, but even a lot of the pregnenolone supplements on the market, because their pregnenolone was synthesized from another precursor, usually something called diosgenin, which is extracted from wild yam. In the process of converting that precursor into pregnenolone, a lot of other substances in very tiny amounts are created, and a lot of pregnenolone products on the market contain something that could be irritable or even estrogenic to many people. I myself did some experiments which kind of add credence to that theory, which was first proposed by Ray himself. So I took pregnenolone powder, right? And first of all, the powder that I get, even though it's from a chemical company established, it says 99+% pure. When you smell it, it has the smell of something which I cannot identify, but it smells like a little bit like of a detergent. It's probably some kind of a solvent that they use to separate the pregnenolone from all the other steroids that are produced as part of this industrial process to synthesize pregnenolone. So I take this pregnenolone and I dump a little bit in a cup, and then I add acetone to it. And pregnenolone is very notoriously poorly soluble in most solvents, but it's very poorly soluble in acetone specifically. So when I stir and I heat it up a little bit, and I stir the pregnenolone in acetone, right? And then I let the cups sit on the table, and then within a minute, all the pregnenolone basically sediments to the bottom. So I extract with a syringe the liquid, the acetone, right? So, but acetone is a very good solvent for other steroids. So anything else that is in that pregnenolone powder, that is potentially estrogenic with potential estrogenic effects is going to be contained into that liquid acetone that remains at the top of the cup. So I extract it, right? Then I repeat the process, pour more acetone, stir for about a minute, let it sediment, extract the acetone. I do it 3 times. I call it George's triple distilled pregnenolone. When I do that, all the smell disappears. It becomes tasteless and odorless, which is how pregnenolone really should be, and that's how Ray said it should really be. And that pregnenolone has very different effects on the pregnenolone without the distillation. Without the distillation, I don't get the facial puffiness and whatnot, but it makes me irritable, which is usually, according to Ray, in my experience, is a sign of intestinal irritation or potential estrogenic components in there. But when I do the distillation, that pregnenolone makes me invariably sleepy, which is a good sign, which means he has an anti-stress hormone effect, and at least does not have these additional things in there that are causing the problems for the other people. So you can try that. You don't have to use acetone. Ethanol works as well, but with the ethanol, you're going to lose a little bit of the pregnenolone because it will get dissolved into the ethanol, but a very small amount. You lose no more than like 2 to 3%. So if you're putting like 100 milligrams into the cup and doing this distillation process with triple distilled, you're going to be losing about 1 to 3 grams of the pregnenolone, which I think for most people is acceptable. Pregnenolone is not that expensive as powder.
Nice. Yeah, that should be pretty helpful for people. So like males looking to supplement with progesterone versus females, because females it would be more beneficial with the higher doses. How would you recommend to supplement with progesterone, or what context for a male?
Oh, I think progesterone for females, it can be used at any dose at any time except during their luteal portion of the cycle, because they're already producing quite a bit. But even then, I have never seen a female that's complained about from higher dose progesterone used without interruption. For males, some males complain that progesterone makes their penises numb, or it gives them like a gyno, or just makes them generally lethargic and whatnot. I find that in those males, their androgen levels are already low. So when you add progesterone, it doesn't have an anti-androgenic effect, but at higher doses, it can interfere with the uptake of androgens inside of the cell. So it can prevent, it can contribute to that already situation of, low presence of androgens. So for those people, just 5 milligrams of DHEA and then any amount of progesterone usually negates those effects and basically allows progesterone to do its anti-cortisol, anti-estrogenic effect, anti-aldosterone as well, anti-inflammatory, without changing anything that the male will be concerned about. Just 5 milligrams DHA. No need to take it several times a day. Just 5 milligrams, and you can take 200 milligrams progesterone with it if you want. It will still prevent those effects.
Nice. Yeah, I think I read you mentioned the bodybuilder who actually used that combination, and
10-to-1. Yeah.
What was that?
That he used it in a ratio of 10-to-1. So he was using basically 5 milligrams of DHEA with 50 milligrams progesterone, and he was injecting that, I think, 2 or 3 times. Not injecting, but like the total dosage that he used was about 100 milligrams progesterone daily and 10 milligrams of DHEA. And for him, that combination had the exact same effects as his testosterone injections, and he didn't want to take the testosterone injections because he was found out that it interfered with his sleep, which is expected because testosterone starts to exert negative feedback and inhibits the synthesis of pregnenolone and progesterone. And without pregnenolone and progesterone, especially without progesterone, you cannot create some of the more sleep-promoting steroids, progesterone being one of them, but another even more potent one is called allopregnanolone. So if you're taking a lot of androgens, even if it's just bioidentical testosterone, you're going to have lower levels of pregnenolone and progesterone and allopregnanolone, so you may have trouble sleeping at night. And he was finding that was the case with his testosterone injection. So he said, well, can I do better? And he asked me, I said, well, progesterone is known to promote sleep. And then I sent him an article saying that progesterone is even stronger cortisol antagonist than testosterone is. And then he wanted to do it, but he was concerned that, well, if I inject progesterone, am I going to lose my muscle mass? And I said, well, I'm not sure, but, if you add just a little bit of DHA, it should negate it. And he did some experimenting and said that, 100 milligrams progesterone with 10 milligrams DHEA daily, that had the exact same effects, allowed him to maintain his muscle mass, and he had been on testosterone injections for years. actually for decades. I think he's a competitive bodybuilder in Bulgaria, and I know I've known him for since we were in the high school, and he's been doing competitive bodybuilding for at least 20 years. And 15 years has been going to different competitions and whatnot. I mean, he's not a world class bodybuilder, but he's definitely a professional one. That's how he feeds himself. So for him, if progesterone and DHA can fully replace the testosterone without giving him any worry of side effects, he's like, I'm all for that. And that's what he's been using, from what I understand. He doesn't use testosterone anymore.
That's fascinating. So could you also like switch that out, the DHEA, with another androgen, like maybe like androsterone or whatnot?
Actually, testosterone. A lot of people you can do androsterone, but a lot of people, and actually older studies show that you can, if you do progesterone to testosterone in a 4-to-1 to 5-to-1 ratio, up to 10-to-1, actually had a bigger, more anabolic and more pro-sexual effects in rats. Those studies were in rats than testosterone by itself, and definitely progesterone by itself. So the combination was more anabolic and more pro-sexual than either one of these steroids by itself. And you can do so if you do progesterone and androsterone in combination. That's basically testosterone. Testosterone is itself, the two main effects are anti-cortisol and also androgenic. Progesterone is an even stronger anti-cortisol than testosterone, and by the way, structurally very similar to testosterone. It's a delta 4 steroid, and androsterone is a relatively potent androgen. So the combination of progesterone and androsterone gives you the anti-cortisol and the androgenic effects that you're getting from testosterone, but without the risk of aromatization. Because if you're injecting or using sufficient amounts of testosterone, eventually you will raise estrogen, while progesterone itself almost impossible to convert into estrogen, even though theoretically it can. Just this pathway is not usable in humans. And also progesterone itself is a relatively potent aromatase inhibitor, and so is androsterone. So if you're using progesterone and androsterone, theoretically you can use them in much higher doses than testosterone. And not only are you going to still get the same benefits, probably even bigger than the testosterone, but also you don't risk the risk of aromatization, which you are with testosterone.
Right. Yeah. What do you think of dosing these substances topically as opposed to orally?
I think it's very, very variable from a person to person, mostly depending on how thick their skin is, how old they are, and basically what's their current, hormonal status. But as far when you dose them topically, if you want to get the exact same effects, it depends a lot on the solvent too. But let's say if they're dissolved in some kind of an oil, and let's say tocopherol, which is the vitamin E, I would say doses 2 to 3 times higher than what you would normally use orally would be needed. But there's going to be some lag because it takes some time for the steroids to get through the skin. So you'll probably, while orally you may feel the effects within 5 minutes, topically will probably take 30 minutes to 45 minutes. But the good news is that the effects from the topical administration tend to last throughout the entire day, actually the full 24 hours. So you don't have to dose multiple times. While with oral, usually if you need to take a couple of times because after a few hours the effects wane, and you need to repeat the dosage. So even for progesterone, the Dr. Pete product, Progest-E, a lot of people that are using it regularly are saying, like, even in the high dose, I need to take a couple of times a day because, if I stop, it loses its effectiveness. But with topical, once it starts kicking in, the onset of the effects is slower, but the duration of the effects is much longer.
Yeah. What do you think about, like you said, the thickness of the skin? What do you think about dosing to the navel or even the gonads? I know people will do that.
They're great. Yeah, the gonads show 50 to 75% penetration absorption rate, and most of the testosterone creams on the market are actually developed for scrotal application on the gonads or on the penis. Penis has a thicker skin, but still decent amount of absorption, probably about 30 to 50%. And people, there's a drug, dihydrotestosterone, actually approved in Europe for a condition called micropenis, which I think everybody understands what that is, and it's being rubbed on the penis, and basically it's fairly effective. So scrotal is even higher absorption. So take that into account because if it's 50 to 70% absorption, let's say 70% absorption, 70% of what you apply is going to end up in the bloodstream. So take that into account. It's almost like injection. And the navel, even higher absorption, rivaling intravenous route, which I think I posted in one study about that, but the area is much smaller. So in your navel, you're probably going to be able to put no more than 4 to 5 drops without it starting to spill. While on the scrotum, you can actually rub a much larger amount because it's a much bigger area there. if you need to absorb, if you need to put larger amounts. But for most people, because the progesterone and DHA have such a good solubility in most of the solvents, you can do naval administration, just a couple of drops, and it seems to last. The effects last like an entire day.
Huh, nice. Yeah. Could you explain the effects of DMSO?
DMSO has been known for a very long time to have an almost 100% penetration through the skin. Unfortunately, for most people, it gives you this garlic taste in the mouth, which is how you know it absorbs very well, because you may put it on the upper side of your foot, and within a minute or two, you're already feeling the garlic taste in your mouth, which means it's already circulated throughout the entire body and reached the mouth. So very good carrier transdermal, but because of this unpleasant side effect, it's not used as often. And also, in order for this for it to retain its strong transdermal penetration effects, if you're using it as a solvent, it needs to be at least 50% of the mixture. Once the absorption of DMSO through the skin starts to drop precipitously, very very sharply, if it falls below 50% of the actual mixture.
Yeah, and I think I've seen you mention before that DMSO actually combined with the steroids and actually give an even better effect.
So after it helps them get in the blood through the skin, it also helps the cells uptake them in high amounts. I don't think the mechanism has been worked out yet why it happens, but the studies have shown that when they administered transdermally steroids to rats, and after that the rats were sacrificed and they started analyzing their tissues, the rats that had the steroid applied to the skin in DMSO had that steroid in much higher concentrations into their cells compared to the other group, which had it applied dissolved in ethanol or something else that had a lower absorption to the skin, but also lower cellular uptake as well.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I have a kind of funny question, but what's your opinion of Bulgarian peating and essentially just the utilization of your or Ray's ideas in a more like voracious or bold experimentation manner?
To experiment with what? With the steroids or with other things?
Yeah, people will take the pro-metabolic substances in a really like bold manner, and I think it's an interesting thing to see.
I think anything that allows a person to feel confident enough to self-experiment on themselves with these substances, it's probably an indication that they're in a better state of health than they were before. If you're feeling fragile, in state of low energy, depressed, learned helplessness, whatnot, you will probably be very, very averse to experimentation or anything novel for that matter. And in this state, you're perfectly primed to listen to the experts and do everything that they say and apply zero critical thinking of your own. We need to move away from that because clearly it's producing catastrophic results. I won't say that I encourage it. It's more along the lines that if you're not doing any experimentation, that's a good indication that you're not in good health. If you are experimenting and trying to figure things out for yourself, I think that's a good indication that you're on the right track. Or at the very least, you're taking matters into your own hands, which should help to break out of the learned helplessness, which, in my opinion, that's the biggest problem that everybody has. Whether they know it or not, most people are in a state of learned helplessness these days, and getting out of that is crucial to improving their, physical health or mental health, even if they don't feel they have a mental health problem.
Yeah. What do you think would be a good idea for a young person trying to gain more of an understanding about like biochemistry, physiology, how to interpret research? Are there any courses or books or reading that you'd recommend?
I would say I don't think there are any special books. I myself have only read one book on biochemistry and one on physiology. There's some books mentioned on the Ray Peat forum where I often post. I don't think there's any special list. Just an introductory book to biochemistry is probably going to be enough. Just enough so that you can understand what the various studies are saying that are being posted out there, and you can critically examine them and say, hey, yeah, you guys say the group that that was on a high sugar diet did the worst, but now I'm looking at the composition of the diet, and it looks like 20%. First of all, it was 20% fat diet. And then of that 20%, the majority was PUFA. So really, it's not a high sucrose diet. It's a high PUFA diet with additional sugar on top of it, that kind of thing. So that people can basically understand how various studies are being used to gaslight them and manipulate them into accepting things that are convenient for the authorities and for the people that are selling us drugs and trying to control us. And they're really not very good for health. So once people have acquired the lingo, which I think can happen by reading a single biochemical book, after that is just reading PubMed studies and little by little putting the pieces together and finding out what works for themselves. The biggest thing is being able to distinguish when a study that says one thing and actually showing something completely different, and it's an obvious hit piece and trying to manipulate you or trying to badmouth something that's known to be very beneficial, such as aspirin. We've seen a lot of hit pieces lately. People emailing me these studies saying, "Hey, this study says that aspirin increases risk of bleeding." And then you look at the study, and first of all, it shows massive doses used that are never going to be used normally by a person, even clinically. Second, number two, they used coated aspirin, which coated aspirin is known to actually have much higher bleeding risk than uncoated aspirin. And third of all, some of these people were already on blood thinner drugs. So it's really you get the study which a normal person will say, oh, the conclusion says aspirin is dangerous. It's going to cause me to bleed to death. I will not be taking it. When we actually read the study, if you know enough of the language, you will figure out that actually the study was with a very poor design, and in fact does not show that aspirin itself causes the bleeding risk. So that kind of thing. So no special books. Any introductory book to biochemistry and physiology would help. And there's some good examples which I don't really. I mean, I don't remember the authors. The titles are Introduction to Biochemistry, and I think Introduction to Endocrine Physiology is another famous one. Array mentioned those couple of those books, and they're mentioned on the forum. So if you go to the Repeat forum and type recommended books, you immediately will come up with a couple of threads that are discussing them.
Yeah, I know there's the Constance R. Martin book, the physiology one, and then
Yeah.
I did see another biochemistry one, so
Yeah.
I think that could be good because a lot of kids I see are getting a lot of education like online, but not really having the basis and like a real like reading research type understanding. So yeah.
Yeah, just basic understanding that will allow you to look at what the study does, and usually the devil, the expression "devil is in the details." With any study, the devil is in the materials and methods section, which is what you should be reading first before reading the conclusions or even the abstract. Just directly go to the materials and methods, and you will see how the study was set up. Assuming they were honest, a lot of them are not. They lie about how the study was set up. That's the worst because you have no way of knowing you have no way of discovering that lie. But most of them, let's assume they're honest, you will often see that the conclusion that was in the study has nothing to do with the way the study was designed, and in fact, very often shows the exact opposite to what the conclusion did. So once you acquire enough of the language to be able to read that study and make those conclusions, after that is just reading literature and kind of like determining whether it makes sense, and if you're willing to experiment on yourself, whether your experiment confirms the study or it doesn't, and ultimately it's about what works for you. No study or collection of studies can determine the truth for you. Ultimately, it's an individual process.
Right. Yeah. William Blake, I believe he said, "Art is life and science is death." So.
And he also said, "I must invent a system or be enslaved by another man's." So,
so like for individuals who can't take thyroid hormone, would you think that something like taurine, pregnenolone, progesterone, anything that activates like bile acid synthesis, like would that be a good alternative?
Yeah, that helps because anything that activates the bile acid synthesis increases the conversion of T4 into T3. However, there are people whose thyroid itself is being suppressed, and since if thyroid is suppressed, you're not going to be able you will not be producing much of a T4 either, right? So for those people, something that increases thermogenesis would be better because ultimately the role of thyroid hormone, the main role is increasing core temperature. And all biological processes inside the body work better when our core temperatures is 98 degrees or higher. Obviously, not to the level of fever. But by the way, that one of the purposes of fever is to increase the activity of the immune system and suppress the activity of the pathogens. So anyway, core temperature above 98 degrees, and some of the thermogenic things are salt, protein, progesterone is very thermogenic. Aspirin in higher doses acts as an uncoupler. Anything over 2 to 2.5 grams of aspirin per dose is going to uncouple you. So it's going to work similarly to T3. In fact, old treatment for hypothyroidism before they were able to isolate the T4 and the T3 hormones, and there was no glandular thyroid around, or the person wasn't willing to take it, or they weren't reacting well to it, was actually 6 to 7 grams of aspirin daily. It had the exact same effects as taking T3. Now, that's a high dose. So if somebody's doing that, I would recommend taking, at least 5 to 10 milligrams of vitamin K, just to keep the risks of bleeding from aspirin low. I know people who've been taking the dose without vitamin K for years because it used to be a treatment for rheumatoid arthritis back in the day when there was no cortisol and whatnot. And some of the very old people who still have the arthritis are not willing to take cortisol or any of the newer drugs, which, by the way, are all toxic. They're still using the high dose of aspirin, no vitamin K, no bleeding issues, but I think it's safer to take a little bit of vitamin K with it. And there are other metabolic uncouplers out there. Vitamin K2, especially K3, actually is a known uncoupler. I noticed several new studies with it. So you can try that, but it's harder to obtain. And I suspect vitamin K2 is also an uncoupler because it's structurally almost identical to vitamin K3. So the vitamin K family, and it's also a quinol, so we know it stimulates metabolism. So a combination of, let's say, moderate dose aspirin, let's say a gram or two a day, plus 15 to 20 milligrams of vitamin K, I think it should be able to replicate a lot of the effects of T3, even if your thyroid is completely suppressed. But for people whose thyroid is not completely suppressed, but they're having problems with the conversion of T4 to T3, a safer thing will be just to take taurine and other things that increase bile acid release.
That's amazing. Thank you. I really do appreciate this, Georgie, and thank you for giving me your time. So
appreciate it. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Good to talk. Thank you. Appreciate it.